We stand for the true and north, the cities and skylines, the strong and free. For those who value the story and source, the opinion and fact, the context and clarity to help illuminate the path and potential, the drive and direction. We are the one and only, the Globe and Mail. What shapes your world?
Hello and good afternoon to those of you in the room here joining from across the Atlantic provinces. Good morning to everyone tuning in from across the country. It's great to have you all with us. Welcome to Intersect 26 Atlantic Canada. I'm Lindsay Jones, the Globe and Mail's Atlantic reporter, and I'm based right here in Halifax. I'm pleased to be your master of ceremonies today, and I'll be on stage periodically throughout the program. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are situated in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. As the Globe's Atlantic reporter, I cover all 4 provinces here, and specifically over the last year, I've been focused on investigative work around the case of Nova Scotia's missing children, Jack and Lily Sullivan. I've revealed how the country's first interprovincial registry for doctors, the Atlantic Registry, failed to protect patients, and reported a national newspaper award-winning story with my colleague Patrick White on forever chemicals leaching into the drinking water of communities in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. We don't usually do this at Globe and Mail events, but given the circumstances, we thought it would be fitting to play the national anthem. If you were able to, please stand. It's fantastic to see such a strong turnout today for what promises to be an action-packed and inspiring day. We're here to explore how we can build a stronger Canada by diving into the opportunities and growth potential within one of our most distinctive regions, Atlantic Canada. On your table, you'll see a tent card with a QR code that will take you to the agenda for the day. The other side has a link to the event survey so you can give us feedback on your experience. If you have any questions or need help throughout the day, please ask the registration desk or any of my Globe and Mail colleagues wearing a red lanyard. And now I would like to welcome the Mayor of Halifax, Andy Fillmore, to provide official greetings.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here in beautiful Pier 21. I hope you're enjoying the food and the view. I'm enjoying the view from here of lots of familiar faces and old friends, but also a lot of new friends who are visiting from away. So I'll begin with a very warm welcome to all of you. Welcome to our city. I hope that you have fond memories of it when you leave. I hope you spend a little money while you're here. That'd be good too. But I'm sure you'll keep busy and have an enjoyable time. I do want to thank, the Globe and Mail for bringing this conversation to Halifax. I was just speaking with Lindsay backstage a moment ago and telling her that Halifax is going to give the Globe and Mail lots of reasons to come back in the coming years. We're going to keep you busy out here. There's lots going on. Intersect is a very fitting name for this conversation because the biggest issues facing Halifax and, in fact, facing Canada are no longer in separate lanes. Things like defense, like trade, housing, infrastructure, productivity, immigration, public trust. These are often treated as separate files or separate departments or separate orders of government, but it's in cities where all of those things intersect, and they intersect quickly. In Halifax, they intersect very visibly. You can see that on the harbor, you can see it at the shipyard, you can see it at the port, you can see it at the airport. You can see it in our housing demand, you can see it in construction sites, ferry terminals, and you can see it in the growing pressure of all of our systems that make daily life possible here and make it work for the people who live here. And of course, Halifax has always played a very important role nationally and internationally. It was built around this incredible harbor that connects Canada to the world. The city has been shaped by defense, by trade, by immigration, shaped by shipbuilding for generations, and now new generations of shipbuilders are calling Halifax home. And of course, the movement of people and goods across the Atlantic Ocean over all of these years. Halifax is Canada's defense city. That's not new. What is new is the speed and the scale of the moment that we are in and what we're being called upon to deliver. Canada is having very serious conversations right now around sovereignty, around defense capacity, around supply chains, economic resilience, national productivity. But this moment asks for much more from us than simply benefiting from our growth. It asks whether our systems are prepared to receive this investment and this growth. And those conversations at a national level, these national investments can seem abstract, but locally they become very, very practical. They become housing demand. They become workforce needs. They become transit availability and transit usability. They become water and wastewater capacity. They become permitting, procurement, energy, roads, and ultimately the ability of government and institutions to deliver. And as elected officials and institutional leaders, we really need to be clear-eyed about the opportunity that we're in this moment. Growth only succeeds when people can feel its benefit in their everyday lives. If growth simply succeeds in putting more pressure on housing supply or infrastructure or dampens our mobility through congestion or an overburdened transit system, then it impacts our quality of life, then we will have missed the point of that growth in the first place. So our success should be measured not only by economic competitiveness and productivity, and it should, those are important things, but also by whether residents experience their city as more livable, more connected, and more affordable. And that is the central challenge facing cities like Halifax right now, and certainly core to our work at City Hall in this moment. And we can't talk about economic growth without talking about housing. We can't talk about defense readiness without talking about industrial capacity. We can't talk about people and public trust unless governments are prepared to be honest about the trade-offs that come, disciplined about spending, focused on delivery, because national ambitions become realities at the local level, at the city level. And here in Halifax, we have to take that responsibility very, very seriously, and we do. We're very proud to host this conversation, but more than that, we're proud to be one of the places where these national questions are becoming tangible. Because if Canada is going to build more, trade more, defend more, and compete more seriously in the world, then cities like Halifax have to be ready. Our infrastructure has to be ready, our institutions have to be ready, and our residents need to feel that that readiness is positively impacting their everyday lives. That is the standard. So my hope for today is that the conversation is practical. I'm sure it will be, that it's clear-eyed, and that it recognizes, the scale of the moment that we're in and the responsibility that comes with it. Canada has built big things before, and Halifax has played a major role in that story before, and I believe that Halifax is being called upon again to play a major role in this moment. I hope you enjoy the conversations. I hope you enjoy Halifax, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Andy Fillmore. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how Halifax grows and prospers in the coming years, and perhaps we'll see more of that. We'll see some coverage of that in the Globe and Mail. Please join me next in welcoming Mohammed Hashim, CEO and Executive Director of Canadian Race Relations Foundation, to the stage to provide opening remarks.
Good morning. So first of all, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to the Globe and Mail for bringing this conversation to Halifax. You know, it's really meaningful to be here at Pier 21. For roughly 1 million people, this was a doorway into Canada, the place where a new chapter began. So before anything else, let me just acknowledge that we are on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The story of who belongs in this country did not begin at this pier. It began long before, and it continues today. Halifax is a really special place for me, I gotta tell you. It's where I proposed to my wife, and she said yes. So I love being back here. You can go and see the spring gardens. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. You know, when I first became the CEO of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, one of our board member, Raymond Tynes, asked me to help with something that was really painful. There was a transit app called Move It that had let a user label the North Preston community in a very vicious and terrible racial slur. And as many of you know, North Preston is one of the oldest Black communities in Canada. We worked together to resolve the issue and to restore dignity to the problems that app had created for the community. But it was a moment where I got to meet a lot of the people on the ground here who really stood up and built a collective voice to do things differently. And this is what I've really come to appreciate about the leadership, that working together here, we can keep our community strong, even in hard times. We walked in here today and felt, honestly, like the most beautiful, warm Atlantic welcome, and yet, you know, belonging, inclusion, and equality have never been a given here as well. It took lifetimes of representation to become real. You know, right here is Lindell Smith right there. He's the first African Nova Scotian ever to be elected to Halifax Regional Council in 2016. That's when the first African Nova Scotian was elected. We have Dr. Rustam Southwell. Where is he? Right there over there. The Chancellor of Dalhousie University, who is the first Black Chancellor of this prestigious university and all its history. And I got former Assistant Commissioner Dennis Daly from the RCMP here, who stood in North Preston 2 years ago and apologized to the African Nova Scotian community for street checks. Thank you for your leadership, sir. Change comes slowly, but only with intentional work. This is why the CRF exists, and it's why the CRF will soon be announcing a Halifax Regional Municipality African Nova Scotian Fellowship. It's an 8-week program where we're providing opportunities to youth to experience council, to work for the mayor, to see themselves at the table of power, and to be able to see themselves in that opportunity to be able to contribute. I want to thank Councillor Virginia Hinch, the city's DEI Managing Director, Tracy Jones-Grant, and the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute CEO, Sylvia Perez-Drummond, for their leadership and collaboration. So here's what I'll leave you with. Every single person in this room holds power. It only matters, though, if we use it deliberately, to embed equity into decisions getting made, and to unlock the true potential of Canada's workforce. Economic development is incredibly important. But we've seen what economic development has looked like here in Halifax as well. Africville is an example. That was an economic development project. And the reason I'm pointing these things out is because, and the reason why I'm pointing to you the first, is because we're actually in a moment where the opportunity will follow the momentum that has been built. And that there are so many communities here who can be tapped in, who can benefit, who can really actualize their potentials if being brought in to this conversation of economic upliftment and inclusion. That's what's in front of you too. Let us not forget what our past is. Let us ensure that the future looks brighter for everybody. And let's make sure that no one is left behind, whether that's the African Nova Scotian entrepreneur, not the McMappy Fisher, not anyone, because that's the opportunity that is in front of us, and that's what's going to make Canada strong. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's so nice to hear that people are thinking about equity and inclusion at the same time as economic development. So let's begin with our first session of the day, a growth outlook on the current trajectory for Atlantic Canada as a region. For this scene setter, we're very fortunate to be joined by Susan Rimmer, Senior Executive Vice President and Group Head of Commercial Banking at CIBC. She'll make an opening address, and afterwards, she'll sit down to chat with Ian Bailey, reporter with the Globe and Mail's Ottawa Bureau. So Ian, soon after his family immigrated to Canada, he took a memorable and winding road trip through all 4 Atlantic provinces, visiting each capital and major city along the way, and he found himself back in the region professionally based in St. John's as a reporter with the Canadian Press, correspondent reporting to Halifax. Those combined experiences gave him a deep, lasting connection to Atlantic Canada that stayed with him ever since. Please welcome Susan and Ian.
So thank you, Lindsay, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here at Pier 21 in Halifax, a place that has welcomed so many to this country. I'm really inspired by the mayor's words and Mohammed's words. Just terrific to hear that the culture of inclusion and the spirit of growth is alive and well in Halifax. So this is a fitting backdrop for a conversation about Canada's future. And today, I would like to reflect on the contributions of Atlantic Canada and the promising outlook for Atlantic Canada's future. As a nation, we are at an important crossroads. The mayor called it a moment. I'll call it a crossroads. This is a moment that actually presents us with an opportunity for self-reflection and collective action. And by embracing the opportunity, we can work together to build a stronger and a more dynamic Canada for generations to come. But allow me a moment just to start talking about our shared history, CIBC and Halifax, Nova Scotia. So CIBC's roots in Halifax run deep, actually. Our predecessor company, the Halifax Banking Company, opened for business in 1825, later merging to become part of CIBC. And over 2 centuries later, our commitment to this region is as strong as ever. With 87 branches and offices across all of Atlantic Canada, CIBC is deeply committed to supporting growth across the region, and we have proudly partnered with multiple First Nation groups on large-scale infrastructure projects, supported onshore wind development, projects near and dear to my heart, and worked with a really diverse range of clients seeking financing to really capture the opportunities emerging across Atlantic Canada. And it's really interesting to me that growth in this region has outperformed the national average for 2 consecutive years. Although there are challenges ahead, sectors like health and energy and innovation will really help to support the recovery in this part of the world. Atlantic Canada relative resilience speaks to the strength of this region's economic foundation. The provinces, we know that the provinces that weathered 2025 were those who weathered it really well, were those who actually had less exposure to US tariffs through stronger diversification. And we know that the upside ahead is real. Newfoundland and Nova Scotia's seafood industry, for example, could really benefit from the suspension of Chinese seafood tariffs. And we know that more Canadians are choosing to explore their own backyard, including my family, and Atlantic Canada is a compelling destination. Large-scale projects in infrastructure, in energy and wind are creating generational growth opportunities across the region. And Atlantic Canada, we know, is a leader in innovation. You'll all remember Verafin, the St. John's company, for those in capital markets. This stands as one of the largest private equity exits in Canadian technology history. The Creative Destruction Labs in Atlantic Canada are also located in Halifax, and has created leading partnerships with entrepreneurs and investors. It's exciting. We know that Halifax is also home to Sandpiper Ventures, again, a venture firm well known to CIBC. They invest in women-built companies. Terrific to see that inclusivity and priority. And then let's come to the big opportunity, defense and security. Atlantic Canada has a critical role in supporting our sovereignty and economic security. Nova Scotia is home to 13,000 military personnel and 17,000 defense and aerospace workers. This sector generates approximately $2.6 billion per year, roughly 6% of the provincial GDP. And I would argue that that is not a footnote, that is a foundation for growth. Irving Shipbuilding, they're advancing the Royal Canadian Navy's River-class destroyer program. The Cove Hub is giving marine technology companies a world-class platform and now hosts Canada's first Marine Defence Innovation Secure Hub, or DIANA, as a NATO accelerator site. So Atlantic Canada is not waiting to be discovered, it is already leading. But we do know there are headwinds. Population growth, which gave Atlantic Canada such strong momentum, is beginning to ease. Higher fuel costs are putting a real pressure on household budgets, in particular in less urban communities. And unemployment across much of the region has historically run above the national average. However, these are not reasons for pessimism, they are reasons for urgency, and I would express our passion for hope for this region. From my conversation with clients and leaders across North America and internationally, 3 themes have consistently emerged. They are relevant to our national agenda and relevant to Atlantic Canada. Number 1, guarded optimism. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to speak to a host of leaders from this community at dinner last night. And businesses do see Canada's potential. They see Halifax's potential as well as the Atlantic province's potential. They want to be helpful. We all see a country that can help lead. Second, our time is now. This is our moment. The actions we take today will help to define the success we achieve tomorrow. Pace, urgency, and public-private partnerships are not optional. They are truly essential. For too long, capital has flowed outside of our country, and this is true of financial capital, but it's also true of our human capital. We cannot afford to lose either one. Young Canadians are just as vital to the future of this nation as the next dollar of investment capital. And number 3, we must prove that we can execute, and that means getting more major energy and infrastructures built on time and on budget. It means the public sector, the private sector, and Indigenous communities working together. Our collective ability to deliver has never mattered more than it does today. We have seen progress at the provincial level here in Atlantic Canada, and this includes major investments and commitments for healthcare and infrastructure, really aimed at driving new development across the province. We've seen Premiers Holt, Lance, and Wakeman and their teams trying to make it easier to do business here and attract investment. It's impressive. And in his recent State of the Province address, Premier Houston emphasized the critical role of energy in driving the economy, driving growth, and ensuring a sustainable future for the region. We know that the private sector is coming forward with capital for Canadian businesses, and there's more potential here that's untapped. And CIBC is committed to be a partner in that work. So over the past 3 years, we at CIBC, we've increased our commercial and corporate lending across the country by almost $20 billion. We believe in a strong Canada. We recently hosted the Defence and Resiliency Summit, the first of its kind held by a major Canadian bank, bringing together leaders from the private sector, the public sector, and really to advance an area where Canada has clear global advantage and clear industrial promise. We believe that national resiliency starts with strong communities, and I'm proud to share that we are committing over $800 million by 2032 to support the communities and neighborhoods that we call home across the country. We are well on our way with over $144 million in corporate and employee giving to charities, nonprofits, and community organizations in 2025. And we know that Atlantic Canada has world-leading universities and research capabilities. We're proud to support their efforts. Since 2020, CIBC has committed more than $3.3 million to organizations right here in Halifax, including Dalhousie University, the QE2 Health Sciences Centre, and the United Way of Halifax. We know that healthcare and innovation are essential pillars for community progress. And at CIBC, we truly recognize the impact of the quality of life and sustainable economic growth. We are proud to be really helping advance these priorities. So let's reflect on this moment. Canada does stand at a pivotal moment. Across the country, there is resolve and determination that is showing up in our conversations, it's showing up in our actions, and our bank really believes in the true potential of our country if we act on the greatest opportunities. We are the Bank of Commerce. We always have been, we always will be. We know that Canada has the natural resources, the talent, the institutions, the values to lead. What is required now is the will to act with urgency, with confidence, and with a renewed sense of ambition. Every business, every person, every sector, everyone in this room, we all have a role to play. So let's act with urgency. Let's act with confidence and with a renewed sense of ambition, drawing on the advantage that has set Canada apart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. A compelling speech, and it gives us a lot to talk about in the next
Thank you,
few
Ian.
moments.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
First off, what can you tell us, I guess, about yourself professionally and personally?
Sure, happy to. So I lead the commercial banking business at CIBC. I sit on the executive committee of the bank. I've been in the financial services sector for over 30 years. Yes, I'm that old. And I spent the first formative years of my career, first 15 years, at a Wall Street firm. And then I've been at CIBC since 2009. I've had the good fortune to work in London, England. I've done a lot of work in the US in my history. And I'm now based in Canada, based in Toronto full-time. And I do feel quite connected to the Halifax community. My son did his undergraduate studies at Dalhousie, and yes, he graduated. We had a wonderful time here as a family learning more about the city.
Excellent. You mentioned the Defence and Resiliency Conference. Why is CIBC moving into this space? What can you tell us about the thinking there?
Yeah, so we think that defence and resiliency, this is a key tenet of the federal government. And if we look at the defence and security prioritization, this is really an important part of our national and industrial strategy. And so we know from the federal government that there is a commitment to invest over $500 billion over the next 10 years to advance our defense and resiliency across the country. So this is a national priority, it's an industrial priority. And when we put up the idea of hosting a summit, the idea was that we would bring together government, business, investors, public policy, thinkers, Indigenous communities from right across the countries to have this conversation. We were fortunate to be joined by our Minister of Defense, the Honourable McGuinty. And what he spoke of, which really rang true for me, was this need in this moment to really act in a collaborative way. It's the collaboration across all of these spheres of society that are going to be required to really advance our economic sovereignty, our health priorities, our economic security, our food security, and really thinking about that economic resiliency that we want to build into this country. So it was an exciting forum. And again, that theme of collaboration and that theme of national priorities, again, I think many of which will take root in Atlantic Canada. It's an exciting prospect for the future.
Excellent. You mentioned in your remarks about the need to act now and with urgency. What obstacles would you like to see removed, and what specific areas should we, and by we, I guess, folks in this room, members of the Atlantic Canadian community, deal with?
Sure, Ian, it's a great question. So maybe I'll start by just reflecting on the businesses and companies that I speak to across the country in my current role. My observation would be that Canadian companies, businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs have been remarkably resilient in the face of what has been quite remarkable uncertainty as a consequence of the trade file. Mm-hmm. So that resiliency is really well noted across the country. I would say, though, our economists, they estimate that the trade uncertainty has clipped between 50 and 75 basis points off our GDP growth in Canada. So not terrible, but certainly not sustainable. Mm-hmm. So we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we act? How do we act now? And I would propose a couple of key changes that I think we can all reflect on and act on. And the first would be, let's have a look at the burden of regulation on corporate Canada. Mm-hmm. So I'll quote François Parrier, who is the CEO of TC Energy. He noted that in 2021, in Canada, we had over 320,000 regulations, up 37% over the previous 10 years. Let's really think about what complexity those regulations actually bring to folk doing business across the country. If we can eliminate some of the uncertainty and smooth some of the regulatory process, I think we can act with pace and urgency. So I'd say regulatory is one. The next one that I would think about is permitting. And many of you in the room will be very familiar with permitting processes required to build your businesses, to actually extract natural resources across the country. Several mining executives across the country have told me that it takes 12 to 15 years to permit a mine in Canada. Capital doesn't wait that long. Capital doesn't have that kind of patience. So again, I think the permitting agenda is a really important one. And I think we also have to talk, Ian, about interprovincial trade barriers. And I know the Globe and Mail has been quite thoughtful in writing about interprovincial trade barriers. But I think the reality that a lot of our clients see across the country is that there are differences in certifications, in licensing, in business practices that make it really hard to do business cross provincial borders. So I think there's a real opportunity for all of us to reflect on what changes are needed to help us do more business across our wonderful country.
Is the delays to get mines approved, even with a major projects office launched by the current government, by current federal government?
Well, honestly, I think very highly of Dawn Farrell and the major projects office. She's going to make it happen. She's going to help us pave the way as a country. But I think we all need to continue to reflect on how we can be change agents in that agenda.
I'm going to go on to two other subjects before we conclude, but for folks who are here, what can they do to move on these issues you've mentioned the last few moments if there are points of concern for them?
Yeah, so what can we do as business people in this room and policymakers in this room? Make sure your voices are heard. Have a point of view and articulate that point of view. Again, this is our moment for change. We know we have our governmental officials at the municipal level. We heard from the mayor this morning, at the provincial level, at the federal level. We have policymakers listening, so let's act with urgency and make sure that our asks are well articulated.
One last question, I guess, given the time we have left, is about the outmigration of young Canadians from Atlantic Canada, young Canadians who are leaving this region for opportunities elsewhere in Canada, perhaps elsewhere in the world. It's been a point of concern. What's your outlook, the bank's outlook on this trend, and what can people here, leaders in this region, do to deal with that issue, do you think?
Yeah, Ian, it's a great question. And I think it's something that we all spend time thinking about. So let's start with the employment situation in Canada. We saw that the unemployment rate in Canada, it's getting better. We saw federally across the country, 6.6% unemployment rate in Canada. But a troubling stat that we also know is that youth unemployment in Canada is close to double that rate. So I think we all need to reflect on what opportunities we're creating for our young people in Canada. Economic resiliency needs to be rooted in our future generations and in tomorrow's workforce. We know that we are seeding talent outside of Canada. We know that young people are leaving. But what we need to do is, again, let's build that economic resiliency at home. Let's create those career paths. Something that we're doing at CIBC is we're actually partnering with a Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. And that forum is seeking to help young people design educational pathways and careers in the trades, which are going to be remarkably important to building this resilient Canada and certainly this resilient Atlantic environment. So we're leaning in and hoping to be the banking partner who can help those young people with the financial flexibility that they will be required to really chart new learning pathways and new careers.
Is the challenge different in Atlantic Canada than any other parts of the country, you think?
I think it's right across the country. We have seen that if you look at the statistics, we know that in 3 of 4 Atlantic provinces, that the youth workforce is actually declining quite quickly as a participation of the national workforce. So I think we need to be very, very attentive to this matter in Atlantic Canada.
The clock is up. I thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Insights today.
Such a pleasure.
Remarks. And folks, a round of applause for Susan.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Susan and Ian. There's a mentality in Atlantic Canada that you have to leave in order to make it, that to thrive and have a career, you have to go somewhere else. So it's really encouraging to hear about potential growth here and what needs to happen so that people, like all of our children, can stay at home if they want and have a good job. So next, we are pleased to have Stephen Maynard, Managing Partner for Government and Public Sector at EY Canada. He's joining us to provide some remarks. Please give him a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And special thanks to the Globe and Mail for facilitating this really important conversation about really strengthening and building a stronger Canada. There's never been a more important time to have this conversation, and I think we just heard from Susan a really kind of a set of compelling reasons of why we should be optimistic for the future, and certainly for our part at EY and what I hope for the people in this room, that we sort of force and act as a force for good and positivity and optimism, both for our region and for our country. It's never been needed more than it is now. For many years, when we think about Atlantic Canada, we've talked about the need to attract investment, the need to attract growth and talent, mainly because of deficiencies that we all observed in all 3 of those things. Things have really changed, and the environment has changed around us. First, Atlantic Canada is now absolutely at the center of Canada's growth strategy and improving our position as a competitive country in this world. Never before has Atlantic Canada really been so central. When you look at the significant investments that the government is going to be making over the next decade or so in defense and resilience, roughly $230 billion. Atlantic Canada and Halifax in particular will disproportionately benefit from that. One of the challenges, I suppose, as we think about seizing that opportunity as business leaders, as government leaders, as community leaders, is really making sure that we are actually ready to meet that. And so, do we have the critical infrastructure in our region in order to be able to support that type of investment? Are the companies that are needed to participate economically, hopefully with support from CIBC,
are they actually ready? Is the government going to enforce its Buy Canada policy? A lot of defense companies in particular, I spent several hours with defense leaders from the region last week, and what we had heard was real concerns about, will they benefit? How do we avoid a boom and bust model that we've seen in other parts of the country before? And then are we going to be able to attract the workforce and get the type of productivity, whether it's through technologies like artificial intelligence or other digital technologies, to be able to deliver on this massive commitment that we need to deliver for the country? So thinking about where we go from here, certainly collaboration is one of the most important features of our growth strategy as a country, and certainly in Atlantic Canada. I see in my clients skepticism. Will the regulatory environment that we just heard about, will it actually change? 15 years to build a mine, which was one of the examples that Susan used, is one of many, many examples that are getting in the way of unleashing Canada's productivity potential. And so we need to overcome that, and I do agree that we need to do our part in letting our political leaders and others really make sure that they deliver on that commitment. Too often, I think large private equity, large capital pools, big energy companies in Canada we have about $1 trillion sitting on the sidelines right now, despite all of this potential investment, partially because of some skepticism. Will the government actually deliver those reforms necessary? And certainly, it's our view that they must, and it's our hope certainly that they will. So the alignment between Atlantic Canada's future and Canada's future have never been better. We, I think, now need to deliver on the promise collectively. So just in closing, really want to encourage, I think, the continuation of this conversation across the country. It's essential for the future of our country, and certainly from our perspective, trying to bring the parties together, government leaders, business leaders, regulators, and communities together to achieve that goal is very important for us all to remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Now we have a conversation about how increased defense investments are shaping Atlantic Canada. A very timely conversation, and we're fortunate to have a fantastic speaker joining us today. Taking the stage is Anne Fitzgerald, Director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs, Professor of Political Science at Wilfrid Laurier University, and Adjunct Professor at the University of Waterloo. Moderating is Patrick Breuther, Editorials Editor at the Globe and Mail. Patrick was the editor-in-chief of the Brunswick News, New Brunswick's chain of daily and weekly newspapers from 2014 to 2016. In that time, his team won numerous regional and national journalism awards and was nominated for a Mishner Award for 2015 reporting on problems in the province's daycare system. Please give a warm welcome to Anne and Patrick.
We definitely want to talk about the future of defense, but before we do that, can you tell me, you have some roots in the region. I wonder if you could fill the audience in on that.
Yeah, a little root. I grew up in a place called Richmond outside of Ottawa, and unlike most families in the community who had cottages or vacation destinations 3 hours down the road, like Buck Lake or the Kawarthas or the Laurentians, my parents, who were medical and ran a medical practice in Richmond, decided to close up shop every August, and we went to the South Shore of Nova Scotia.
I'm very jealous.
I, in a little place called East Port Le Barre, between Shelburne and Liverpool, and it was something I looked forward to every single year. So it's so nice to be back and smell that air again and think about those roots.
Absolutely wonderful to be back in Halifax. And as having done the left coast, to be back on the right coast, absolutely. So you've, for decades, really been helping to shape the future of global security. And now you're as Lindsay mentioned, at the Balsillie School for International Affairs, and you're now leading the conversation on the intersection of emerging technologies, defense, and international affairs. So I look forward to having that conversation with you. And that's sort of what the editorial board's all about, conversation with readers. We write something, you respond. Boy, do you respond. And it's a back and forth, and we hopefully we share information with people, but I know I certainly learn something new every day from readers. So, and here we are. I look forward to chatting. So one thing I wanted to ask you, I think it was about 70 years ago or so, President Dwight D. Eisenhower built the Interstates, which to me is one of the best examples of something that had a military purpose, but turned out to have a great benefit for the civilian sector as well. And I wonder, when you're looking at the Atlantic, the opportunity for Atlantic Canada right now with defense, is there anything that looks like an interstate-like opportunity?
I think there is. I think the context is significantly different at the moment. And let's start with economics. So the economics models of the 1950s and 60s, and even prior to that, were based on tangible factors of productivity like labor and physical capital. And those factors of productivity are still ever present, but there's a new economy, a new invisible economy, a digital economy, where most of the wealth is captured in invisible assets like data, algorithms, LLMs, artificial intelligence. And we need, therefore, a policy framework and orientation that supports this new. We need management economics courses that supports this. We need security courses supporting this. And knowledge domains. And the other thing is we focused on 3 domains in defense and security: land, sea, and air. And now we have land, sea, air, cyber, and space. Absolutely. And we cannot afford good enough capability in all those 5 areas without thinking about the civilian offsets as well. So this has to be more intentional than the interstate experience in the US, where that transformative benefit to the civilian sector came afterwards and as a result of more organic growth.
Sure.
This has to be intentional, and the good news is that there is a new general purpose infrastructure that will empower all sectors of society in the future. So if we invest in it vis-a-vis defense, then our other sectors will benefit.
And such a great point about cyber warfare. It's, as we're seeing, certainly in the Ukraine conflict, it's just not only its own sphere of conflict, but it spills over into the physical as well. Thinking about drones getting hacked and crashing and all that kind of stuff. So, and it's interesting you talk about the sort of new frontier. I'm wondering, almost in an odd way, we have not spent heavily on military hardware like tanks, capital ships. We're just starting to, at long last, acquire jets. And obviously that's a problem, but I'm wondering, in an odd way, might it not also be an advantage that we aren't locked into a lot of sort of legacy systems?
Yeah, it is an advantage. You can't overstate or overplay the advantage without changing and reversing parts of the defense ecosystem, which have atrophied a little bit as well. And so the administration, the bureaucracy, et cetera, needs to come with it. But yeah, we've got an opportunity to leapfrog into strategic autonomy in a way that is different to what's constraining other countries that have, in some ways, kept up better and with their defense capability at the forefront of NATO standards. So, yeah, I mean, if you think of the capability today that props up every single sector of society, it's very different. It concerns AI. If you think about it as a car, AI is a driver. The engine is computational power, compute. The gas or the electrons are the data going in, right, to feed the algorithms. And then the shell, which is really important, is made up of 3 things, I would say, which have become strategic policy instruments which are highly important, and that is intellectual property, standards, and cybersecurity. And let me just talk about IP for a second, because it's because of the intangible factors of productivity in economics now. IP is very important. It's becoming a rentier economy, where there are two landlords fighting hard in the world for strategic prominence and eminence, and we all become the tenants because we tether ourselves to foreign IP, we tether ourselves to foreign standards. And it's not that we don't have the talent for AI and compute, and indeed we're making tremendous gains in those areas. But we need to bring that ecosystem together with the right strategic policy instruments too. Not be rule takers, be rule makers. Have our own standards which align to our democratic principles and our reputation for that. And so things like IP and procurement and purchasing, they need to jump to very strategic policy instruments.
And I find it interesting, the point you're making on the intersection of defense policy and the sort of the IP imperative, which, you know, I think you've made the case, Jim Balsilli's made the case that we, are, sort of mired in an old economy mindset. But hopefully, and I'm wondering what your thoughts would be, what is sort of a defense crisis, could that finally get us moving on something we should be doing in any case for the civilian economy? Could it be a sort of a boot in the bum?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a real opportunity to scale up our small to medium-sized enterprises. We have many of them. In this kind of intangibles economy and era, we need thousands of more Canadian firms. And what defines a Canadian firm these days is a very interesting concept. And when you peel back the onion, if you find that the IP is foreign sourced, or the software or the platforms are foreign sourced, well, guess what? It's not 1,000% Canadian company anymore. So we can't build everything. We need partnerships, and sometimes we need to buy in. But there has to be rules for each of those scenarios that protects Canadian sovereignty and that can help retain IP talent here, because we can enjoy streams of income and revenue in perpetuity if we get that IP right, and if we focus on value-added productivity too, whether it's canola, whether it's maple syrup, whether it's aerospace, and not just building the cockpits and the frameworks, but building those platforms that bring in Canadian data and therefore allow us to innovate based on our own data.
Now, you mentioned procurement issues just a couple of minutes ago, and one thing I wanted to ask you was, for too long, defense procurement policy has been sort of, regional economic development, in disguise, which that seems to be one of the factors that's really slowed down procurement. So I'm wondering, as we try and rearm quickly, what's the right balance between rearming quickly and getting equipment from wherever, and then sort of building up a domestic industrial capacity, and in the medium and long term? How do you strike that balance?
Well, I think it's less of kind of a ratio and more of, first of all, looking at the geopolitical strategic context. What do we need capability in quickly? And things like over-the-horizon radar, the Global Eye that just came by way of the Saab Bombardier partnership, the seabed capability, protective capability for deep-sea cables, developing northern infrastructure. These are all priorities. Why? Because geopolitics and geoeconomics is putting a lot of emphasis on economic corridors. The three main economic corridors are conflict affected at the moment. So what are the other two opportunities? Either coming through the Arctic or going around the cone of southern Africa. And the latter is very expensive, long, and arduous. So there's lots of eyes on the Arctic as the new strategic frontier at the moment. Atlantic Canada is arguably the gateway to that frontier. And a bridge, I would say, connecting central Canada, the Arctic, and Europe. And look at the ecosystem here in the region. There's fantastic cyber and land force service maintenance training in New Brunswick, the naval capability here in Nova Scotia, and shipbuilding. We have capability in Newfoundland that develops technology for harsh environments and cold weather environments, using sensor, using data-driven platforms, et cetera. So this is what the rest of the world needs and wants. So, and it's also the value-added productivity. And that's important for our trade diversification strategy, because you can't diversify trade unless you diversify products. And the value-added products are very important because we can't just have low value, low volume, or even high value, low volume. We kind of need a mix of all of those things, right? And the natural energy exports are super important because of the sophisticated manufacturing economies like Japan and South Korea and others that can really use that. And we're seeing that in real time now, right? How valuable those exports are. But we also need to use our talent pathways and our amazing universities and what they produce to support entrepreneurialism and to get out there and build 1,000% Canadian firms that will drive the productivity agenda forward. So we can use defense to get there.
So that's a great goal, and the path, it's some interesting thoughts about the path there. I'm wondering, along the way, what are the pitfalls? What are the mistakes we need to avoid, the things to keep in mind?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that the headlines at the moment for all these strategies are AI, cyber, quantum, and we're hearing a lot of people repeat those headlines. I would encourage people to say, all right, we're going to exist on this position on the value chain upstream, and here's where we are downstream on another value chain. And here's our partners that we're going to work with, because value chains are getting shorter now. And so we need to work with more partners. We need to have more alternative partners as well for resilience purposes. And we focus on excellence in those areas. We create new vernacular to help people better understand this intangibles world and intangibles era and what Atlantic companies and entities are doing in that infrastructure.
Sure.
Another pitfall to avoid, I think, is not factoring talent and labor requirements into the critical infrastructure. And then lastly, I would say always build on your strengths.
Sure.
You know, anyone who works with SWOT analysis knows that sometimes there's too much attention placed on threats and weaknesses, but we should pay extra attention to our strengths and bolster them.
Sure, double down on your competitive advantage. So what, I mean, the big picture here, if we do this right, what's the opportunity, for Halifax, for Nova Scotia and the Atlantic provinces and the rest of the country, if we are sort of conscious about this, think about the value chain, pick our strategic partners with a national security overlay, do everything right, what kind of opportunity do you think presents itself?
Well, I think a regional economic ecosystem can develop because there are so many complementary strengths at the moment. One. Two, I think there's an opportunity to value add on that existing ecosystem, which can come together not just by way of industry and private sector, but by way of the universities and the colleges and the policymakers as well. Like that, for me as an educational leader, that triumvirate is very important and one that we are working with increasingly. Thirdly, I would say things like ocean tech plus AI can bring to Atlantic Canada what aerospace brought to Seattle, what semiconductors brought to Taiwan.
And that you mentioned that earlier when we were talking, and it struck me that idea of being world class, the world leader. It's sometimes a little foreign to Canadian thinking. We're like, well, we'll do pretty good, we'll do all right, but to be a leader. And so I wonder how much of this starts with a mindset change?
I think there has to be a culture built around leadership and goal-getting and risk, maybe slightly less risk-averse.
Yes.
But confidence in the fact that we are respected as people around the world. I've worked internationally and only came back to Canada in late 2019, sure. But I seen, whether it's Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, the reception that Canadians get abroad. And I remember having worked with the defense sector for so long, meeting members of the military defense training program in different parts of the world. That was a soft power instrument, something which ceased a long time ago, but it was a very relatively inexpensive soft power instrument that's still discussed today because they left an indelible mark on the societies that they helped. But that was human. That was human beings doing that. And I know Calian is represented on the next panel, but it's things like Calian and Canadian companies
sure.
are doing now internationally. So we need to leverage that soft power projection, and I'd love to see more in policy documents on soft power. But the other thing that we need to do is keep our universities strong.
Sure.
And find ways of sustaining that valuable talent pipeline that companies like Meta and Anthropic and OpenAI and others publicly thank Canada for.
Because we're very generous.
We provide their senior leadership teams, right?
Sure.
So we have to find a way to secure and harness our talent here in Canada and not bleed the talent, and we have to secure and harness our data, because if we do that as the most important asset of any organization these days, we will not bleed GDP. And if we don't bleed GDP, we won't bleed talent. And if we don't do that, then we can grow the pie on the left side of the balance sheet, the GDP, instead of just cutting the same pie up
sure.
into different pieces. And then we can boost paychecks too and retain people. On the other side of the balance sheet, that's important too, because we have to address affordability, drive down the costs, and we can do that by promoting a pro-competition agenda, right? That requires more regional ecosystems coming together. It requires bringing down barriers, interprovincial barriers. It requires supporting entrepreneurialism. And for accountants, financiers, controllers of the future to be able to value those invisible, intangible assets and the worth that they will have in the world, so that capital can be raised more easily based on the net present value of the future streams of revenue that those Canadian ideas will attract.
That sounds like a very attractive future. Hopefully we can get there. So we're close to the end of our time. I'm just wondering, do you have a sort of a closing thought you'd like to wrap up with?
Well, I was thinking to wrap up with the thought about ocean tech plus AI will bring to this region what semiconductors brought to Taiwan, but I would also say the human element on top of that. Let's be that middle power country that stands up for democratic principles, and also for human beings, and take back the night on being taken over by AI. We use AI and leverage AI and all the new general purpose technologies for what they should be leveraged for. But consider humans as part of that critical infrastructure that we have to invest heavily in now, that we have to support, and make Canada increasingly that place where people want to be.
That sounds great. I would just add the incredible history of Halifax as that bridge in both world wars, and indeed, just strolling here, I walked past what I think is the only memorial to the Crimean War in Canada in a park. So that is a long, long history stretching back, and hopefully we can add another chapter to that history.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Anne.
Thank you, Anne and Patrick, for that fantastic conversation. Like Anne, I too would like to take back the night on AI, and I'm sure everyone has their own opinion about that. But now I'd like to call to the stage to provide remarks Scott Moore, Executive Vice President, Finance and Chief Operating Officer of EDC. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the Globe and Mail for convening this conversation, for bringing it to Halifax, and for the opportunity to share a few words. And I was listening backstage, and a number of things that came up in the last panel and probably will come up in the next panel definitely resonate for us at Export Development Canada. Things around plugging into global value chains, I think will come up in a few of the words that I'll say today, and will come up in some of the subsequent panels, and how we do that at scale and make ourselves part of the critical components of value chains around the world, the confidence that we need to actually seize the moment that's in front of us. So I found that actually quite well aligned to things that we've been talking about, I've been hearing about across the country. We've been a trading nation for a long time, as I think everybody in this room knows, and certainly from this part of the country, there's been a key role to play for a long time. And this is absolutely a defining moment. I think we keep hearing that today, and we hear that across the country. There's a lot of doubt and ambiguity, but I think there's also global needs and partnerships that are starting to have a significant impact, especially 1 year later from the shock that we all felt. And I think these factors are resulting in a global shift towards security, so food, energy, but also economic and defense. What makes this moment intriguing from my perspective is that I'll start by saying I'm an optimist, so I guess that's an important starting point. But Canada has a ton of strengths, and I think the question is, how do we leverage them, and how do we leverage them in a way that might be a little bit less understated than we've been historically? So if we boil it down to what we've heard so far today, I think there are certainly a lot of strengths, many of them rooted in Atlantic Canada. Energy and food, for example, I don't have to tell anyone in this room, are traditional strengths. And in the next panel, we're going to continue to talk about defense as an emerging opportunity. As many in this room already know, from a national perspective, the industry contributes $9.5 billion to GDP. There's about 81,000 jobs today, and the federal government plans to grow that number over the next decade by another 125,000 positions. So the push is obviously born from the risks of concentrated trade and security relationships, and it comes from growing demand. Our partners around the world are asking Canada to strengthen our capacity in areas critical to long-term resilience, like dual-use technologies. There's a great example of that here in Nova Scotia. So late last year, Export Development Canada provided a $10 million credit facility to Maritime Launch to help with the build-out of Spaceport Nova Scotia. We made that transaction come together to help foster innovation and strengthen Canada's long-term prospects through sovereign launch capability, which will in turn support a range of needs, including security, telecommunications, and weather monitoring. Maritime Launch is one example that points to something bigger. Canada is indeed entering a period of sustained investment in defense and industrial capacity. It incorporates efforts to modernize, a desire for security, and the need to diversify the markets we work with. Now, this matters everywhere in Canada, of course, but it matters in a very specific way here in Atlantic Canada, because many of the capabilities and demand are already present or already proven in this region. To seize this significant opportunity, though, we need our businesses to transform capacity into competitiveness and opportunity into long-term growth. And we can do that by creating the condition for traditional and emerging markets to scale quickly and enter new markets, which is something Export Development Canada has been focused on for over 80 years. EDC is confident that Atlantic Canada will play a key role in this next chapter. Quickly, though, for those less familiar, Export Development Canada offers financial solutions like insurance, direct lending, and working capital to help companies manage risk, find new buyers, participate in larger projects, or establish overseas operations. In 2025, we supported almost 500 customers across Atlantic Canada, enabling close to $7 billion in exports, foreign investment, and trade development activities. In Nova Scotia alone, more than 225 customers accessed our support, representing $1.8 billion last year. That support spans the key industries we've discussed: agri-food and seafood, natural resources and energy, ocean tech, and digital industries. Even with this support, we see a persistent gap between Canada's advantages and the country's ability to execute at scale in global markets. All of us in this room have a job in front of us. The next decade will reshape global supply chains, and for Canada, this is the time to decide whether we remain a reliable supplier or become a strategic partner at scale. The opportunity is both fundamental and structural. In Atlantic Canada, we have the capabilities, industries, and momentum to be a key player in Canada's success. The question now is whether we scale into it with enough speed and ambition, not just to lead, but to win. Thank you.
We're going to take a short 5-minute break now, but I just want to introduce the next panel we have coming up, featuring 4 senior leaders from across 4 different industries coming together to explore how the maritime region can be leveraged to unlock its next wave of opportunity. We're fortunate to host Chris Pogue, President of Defense and Space at Calian, Joyce Carter, President and CEO of the Halifax International Airport Authority, Paul Jewar, President and Chief Executive Officer of Highliner Foods, and Karen Hutt, Executive Vice President of Corporate Development at Amira, Inc. So we're just going to take a quick 5-minute break and then come back and have that riveting conversation. Thank you. Welcome back. We have our next panel ready to go. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 4 senior leaders from across 4 different industries, and they're coming together to explore how the maritime region can be leveraged to unlock the next wave of opportunity. So we're fortunate to have Chris Pogue, President of Defense and Space at Calian, Joyce Carter, President and CEO of the Halifax International Airport Authority, Paul Jewar, President and Chief Executive Officer of Highliner Foods, and Karen Hutt, Executive Vice President of Corporate Development at Amira. So moderating this impressive group is Ian Bailey, a reporter with the Globe and Mail from our Ottawa Bureau. Please join me in welcoming them all to the stage.
Well, let us begin. Thank you to Lindsay for ushering us on stage, and to our panel. And first question, as we go through a number of important issues, is how is everyone at this point?
Well, that's a great question to start with. It's great to be here. I do a lot of panels like this, most of them somewhere else in the world, Europe or Asia or in the US. Great to be on this stage here in Halifax on such a beautiful day with some good friends here on the stage, but also in the audience, talking about the future of Atlantic Canada, which is something that I know we all are looking forward to talking about.
Excellent. Karen, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Chris, and we're going to go all the way down.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And just to parallel the other panels, my connection was my son was born right here in Halifax, so it's nice to be back in his hometown.
Excellent. And Joyce, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I bring to this panel 2 things: my role at Halifax Stanfield, so one that I've had for a decade, but as well the work I'm currently doing on the Atlantic Economic Panel. So happy to be here and happy to have this conversation in our own town, so thank you.
So I'll just get right into it. Canada is facing very challenging times, of course, across the nation. How are these challenges distinct in your views in Atlantic Canada? Whoever wants to begin with that issue. Joyce, do you want to start? Or Chris, you got your mic.
Yeah,
first.
sure. I think some of the earlier panelists really touched on it very well in terms of the unique position that Halifax and Atlantic Canada is, with 13,000 service people living in your neighborhoods, and they're your neighbors and in your communities, with 40% of Canada's defense assets in Nova Scotia, significant presence with the Navy, the Air Force in terms of both Greenwood close by, and obviously Shearwater right here in your own backyard. And the whole path of this build, partner, buy, and investment in defense, there's a great infrastructure already here from which to build upon.
Excellent. Joyce, we'll go. How are things, your vision from the airport, or how are things?
Great, and I think your question was around sort of unique challenges to Atlantic Canada.
Yes.
So things are awesome at Halifax Stanfield. We have really scaled up over the last 10 years, and it's a great example if you look at it closely. When you invest in infrastructure, the results happen, right? So the most internationally connected airport in North America today. I'd say one of the unique challenges we have in this region is around scale. So Atlantic Canada is still relatively small. Halifax is small, Nova Scotia is small. So one of the challenges that I haven't heard kind of presented today, the previous speakers have been awesome, is just recognize the scale we have and how we can use that to our advantage.
Are the challenges different with the Halifax Airport than other airports in Canada? And any thoughts on the privatization option that the
Well, I
government has
wondered
raised?
if you were going to ask me that question. Like we're 2 minutes on the panel. Are the challenges any different for us?
Yes.
I would say that our opportunities are quite different. So we've got an awesome geographic location on the eastern seaboard. We've really spent a lot of time understanding how we can take advantage of that and grow the services for our community, and you see the results of those. Airport privatization is something that has been reintroduced. It's been introduced a number of times in my time in this role. A different lens on it this time around funding the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Certainly, we love the local model, but as well, we very much want to be open to change. It's a model that's been around for 20 years. And so when we look at some of the structural changes that can happen in the airport system today, we definitely want to have that dialogue at the right time with the government.
Karen and Paul, the distinct challenges in Atlantic Canada. Karen, why don't you go first?
I'll maybe take a bit of a twist on that question and turn it into an opportunity. I think there's a broader challenge if we look at the whole conversation around energy and energy sovereignty from a Canadian perspective. The federal government recently released a national electricity strategy, and in that they call for a doubling of electricity demand by 2050. So just think about that doubling. We're at 2026, and we're going to say that national demand is going to double by 2050. That is a phenomenal challenge from a Canadian perspective, but as we think about that from an Atlantic Canada point of view, there is a really transformative, exciting opportunity when you think about the resource development that we have here that can meet that opportunity. Some of it has been developed in terms of hydro and onshore wind. There's a whole bunch more that can be developed. There's some exciting promise around offshore wind. And if you think about combining that kind of national challenge of how do we make sure that as a country, we have what we need to be able to support economic development, to be able to support our digital infrastructure plans, electrification, resiliency, all of those things, Atlantic Canada has kind of this generational kind of changing opportunity to be part of a massive solution.
Is everything good for reaching that threshold to be able to contribute to the federal plan? Or pulling everything together in time?
Is everything good? Yeah. Well, that's a loaded question.
Is everything okay?
Still loaded. So look, there is a lot that needs to happen here, and I think that this is not an opportunity that any single party or any single person can do on their own. This is an opportunity for coalitions to come together and to lead on this, and so that is what needs to happen in terms of creating the policy clarity, the role clarity, governance, investment. How do we think about customer affordability and all of those things? So those are important, but we need infrastructure too. We need critical infrastructure, transmission infrastructure. If we really are serious about bringing the kind of scale of resources that we're talking about to meet these national demand numbers, we need transmission infrastructure.
Excellent. Paul, how are the challenges? What do you see as the distinct challenges of this region?
Yeah, I think many of the challenges are quite similar, maybe more acute here. One for me is we have to, I think, relearn a couple of years of history. I mean, this region was always so good at serving the world. And over the last couple of centuries, we've become very good at serving the rest of Canada, have become heavily reliant on the US. And I think there's a real opportunity for us here now in this moment to think more globally once again, as a region and obviously also as a country. I think the other thing that is more acute in Atlantic Canada, and one of our speakers referred to it earlier, is the demographic crunch we're going to face in terms of availability of labor, and ensuring that we're, as a region, doing the things that we need to do to have the right talent pool available in order to address the opportunities that exist globally.
What things need to be done to deal with the talent pool in your view? What are the best ideas for doing that?
Well, I think some of the challenges we're currently facing on the immigration front need to be addressed. It's very appropriate to talk about this in this building that we're in.
Of course.
This part of the world has been a great beacon of opportunity for immigrants for so long, and I think it needs to continue to be, because we're going to rely on that labor force as we continue to grow as a region.
Before moving on, is the federal government and the provincial government working together? Are they sort of in tune with dealing with that issue, do you think?
They're certainly focused on it, but I think some of the changes that have been made over the last number of years have caused us to take a couple of steps back. Now we need to figure out how we take a number of steps forward.
Related question perhaps, but what's the hurdle, and this is open to the group, the one hurdle that Atlantic Canada needs to overcome to reach its full potential in your view?
I'll start.
Go.
So it's back to the scale issue, and we didn't prep for this panel together, so this isn't set up. But Karen, to the point that you made is the collaboration that's required in the region to be able to scale up absolutely has to happen. And so oftentimes it's easy to think about your own city, it's easy to think about your own province. We need to think as Atlantic Canada, and we need to do that more, and we need to collaborate in order to do that. And so real challenge really to all of us in the audience, to our business partners, to our government, to make sure that we are in every opportunity that we get, because this opportunity will pass us by. We are thinking collectively as Atlantic Canada. And that's not easy, that's a change for sure.
What needs to be done to sort of push that collaboration? You have the premiers, the provincial governments, they're coming in, they're doing the job. Is it a role for them, for the business community? Who has to take that lead?
I think for everyone, certainly you're right. The premiers work really well together. They have a council of Atlantic premiers, and even on the air file, I can see collaboration happening there. I just think it needs to happen more frequently and more quickly.
Okay, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think when I think of this specific region, and I think of the moment where everything has a defense or a defense infrastructure related aspect to it, or at least that's where the money is going. And then I think of this region, and I think of Canada in general. The goal of the Defense Industrial Strategy is to have 70% of capital programs going to Canadian companies. If we had to flip that switch and do that tomorrow morning, there isn't enough of them. It actually couldn't happen. Because the bulk of Canadian industry that's Canadian owned and operated and generating IP, to the previous panel, are small businesses, 130 plus small businesses just in this region. And those businesses need to be able to have the capital to scale, but also the demand signals, and we need to build them to become medium-sized businesses. And we need to build large businesses. You have Irving, you have IMP, great businesses for sure in the defense sector. We need more of those, because those large integrators who will pull those smaller niche players into the marketplace. So it's in this room is the challenge. The government has set clear direction. We couldn't do it tomorrow if we wanted to. We can do it in the next decade if we collectively, each of us, hold the government accountable what they said they want to do, hold each other accountable to building together. I think it's very possible to deliver on the Prime Minister's vision.
Interesting. Karen and Paul?
Well, I think just to pick up on Joyce's comment, I think that from an Atlantic Canadian perspective, there's a few things that we need to consider. We are a small market when we think about us relative to other larger markets. That's not new. We're used to that. We're used to thinking about how we get our products to market and that sort of thing. But for the kinds, and I'll just go back to the energy file for a moment, for the kind of opportunity that we're talking about here, there's a collective mind shift that needs to happen. Now, interestingly, it's easy to kind of group Atlantic Canada as one region. We all know, if you live in Atlantic Canada, that's not at all the case. And I think we need to park the emotion that sometimes comes with that and look at the collective opportunity, and how do we all lean into this, recognizing that we're going to have to be prepared to make trade-offs. Not everybody is going to be able to get everything they want right now, but we're talking about a generation worth of opportunity. So part of the job is making sure that we paint that shared vision and everyone can see themselves as part of that success. So yes, we need to go fast. There's no question about that. I suspect we'll talk about that later. But if we go so fast that we haven't spent the time helping people understand where they fit and the role that they play and what the collective win is, because to be clear, this can change this economy, but we need to make sure that everyone can see that. And once you have that, then you can go fast.
Interesting. Paul?
Yeah, and this I think ties back to my earlier comment. One of our hurdles here is our humility, and humility is a wonderful strength. In some cases, I think for us, it's a strength overplayed. One of the great experiences I've had over the last couple of years since stepping into the role I stepped into at Highliner is the time I've spent internationally and the reception that we get globally and the recognition we get as a leader in the industry from right here in Atlantic Canada, from roots that go back 126 years ago. That is something that we need to be proud of. It's something when we have successes in this region, we need to celebrate more. And as we do that, I think that will bring more attention globally to what we can offer from here in Atlantic Canada.
What if I could just add a dimension, because I'm picking up on the comment about going fast. And this would be from the lens of the defense sector more so than the infrastructure and everything else that needs to be built around that for defense to work. I think we need to be thoughtful and go with pace. But going fast generally means you're going to buy somebody else's stuff that's already built. You're probably not going to build much. And that's okay unless we really want to do what the Defense Industrial Strategy says we want to do. So we have to move with pace, we have to move purposefully. And when we do buy something, and you've heard announcements, and there'll be more announcements on a submarine, for example, in the not too distant future, when we do buy something, we need to buy it thoughtfully. That says the access to the intellectual property of that vessel is needed for Canadian industry to ever be able to engage in that platform. So all the infrastructure that we need to build to support that won't matter if the industry doesn't need it. And so fast, yes, but I would argue pace thoughtfully. Otherwise, I think we will look back a decade from now and say, how did we miss that opportunity?
And just to add to that, I think it's a wonderful point, and Anne mentioned this earlier as well. We need to think about how we value add here in this region. Highliner was a company, when we started, we caught fish and sold it locally and globally. Now we're a branded, value-added seafood company. We do the value adding here in Atlantic Canada and our facilities in the US. Creating value and then exporting that value and getting paid for that value is something that's absolutely critical for this region. Not just exporting commodities that we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to have.
Excellent. I think you.
I just want to add to your comment a few moments ago about celebrating success. And so I'll refer back to the Atlantic Economic Panel. If you don't know what it is, look it up, just not right now. And you will see the great work that's happening there, including a lot of research, public opinion polls, and sit-down meetings. And one of the most common things that the best line I picked up, I think it was in St. John's, Newfoundland, is we need to learn to stop celebrating survival, right? And so turn that attitude into celebrating success. This is common in Atlantic Canada. We survive, we're good, and that needs to shift.
Are you optimistic about that shift happening, or?
Totally, 100%. There's a lot of ambition out there. It will happen.
It's a funny story. The point's such a good point. There's a funny story about a half a dozen or 8 to 10 small businesses that we work with through Calian Ventures at Calian, and they refer to themselves as the cockroaches because they've survived for a decade, right? And yes. I really appreciate, they have little crests on their jackets, you know, and so I think her point is really bang on. We have to get past survival and get to this consciousness of structure and discipline in building an industrial sector.
Interesting. Anyone else have any response to that notion, or we're good?
I think part of that is true, but I don't ever wonder for one moment whether or not we can do big things here. We can do big things here. We have the capacity to do that. We've demonstrated that. I work for a business that built the Maritime Link, which was a connector between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. It was a 170-kilometer subsea HVDC marine cable that is the first of its kind in North America. We did that here in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. We can do big things. I don't worry about that. I worry about more, can we bring together all of the parties who need to be part of this to go forward? Can we do it in a way that we take advantage of this window of time, because it's not unlimited?
Excellent. Paul, you?
Yeah, no, I think the comments are great. The reality is there's a lot of lessons learned from surviving, and we've learned a lot of lessons over a long time here in Atlantic Canada by doing that. And resiliency today is about creating opportunity, not just about thriving, not just about surviving, but thriving. And I think we have some wonderful opportunities in that regard when we recognize it and take advantage of it.
I'd like to move into another area, and I was going to deal with it a bit later, but there's 4 chairs here. If there was an empty chair there and Mark Carney was sitting in it, he is today in Ottawa dealing with the affairs of state, each of you, what would you say to him about what Atlantic Canada needs right now, based on some of the points you've raised in the last number of minutes? What would you say to the Prime Minister? We'll go down, Paul, we'll start with you and work way down. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's interesting. I was on a panel similar to this in March in Norway. And the first question I got on the panel was, what did you think of the Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos? And it was a question from an American in front of a European audience. And what I said then and what I would repeat here is it's exactly what Canada needed, it's exactly what the world needed. And so that kind of leadership federally, working with the provinces to show the world what Canada can do differently in this time, I think is absolutely critical. So I would encourage that to continue.
Okay.
I'll answer this through an energy lens and specifically electricity. So I talked about the National Electricity Strategy, and that's fantastic that we have a federal government that's thinking big and broadly around electricity. The reality is electricity is governed provincially. And so up until now, it's been each province's job to take care of their own planning needs and their own electricity systems, and we are living, what you get as a result of that is a missing of interconnectivity across the region. And so if we actually want to do something about this national electricity strategy, if we want to implement that, then I would say, Prime Minister Carney, please be the convener of this. Please bring together all of the parties on this and let us all think about the solution to this differently than how we've approached it to the past. And it needs that kind of leadership, and I believe that if it comes, people will step up and they will lean in and they will accept the challenge, but it does need that convening, I think, initiative to happen first.
Thank you. Chris?
He's there, right?
He's around the corner.
I would start off with thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was 20 years in the Canadian Air Force, 20 years now across the defense industry, and I'll pick up a different speech than the Davos one. At CANSEC, which is Canada's largest trade show, end of May, the Prime Minister spoke at the opening breakfast of CANSEC. In the 40 years of my memory, a Prime Minister has never even shown up there. That was huge. That sent a message to people that the Prime Minister has skin in the game. He's committed to this. So my ask would be, don't hesitate to hold us accountable, because we're going to hold you accountable to this vision. And I would say, while you got an afternoon off here, certainly visit Irving and visit IMP, but stop at 15 of those 130 small businesses that live in this area, because innovation is happening inside those doors. And you have to help us find a way to bring that innovation to the battlefield. And I think the Prime Minister would hoist that aboard and realize that if 85% of Canada's defense industry is small businesses, I better pay attention.
Thank you. Joy?
It's always good to go last. So he's sitting right here. I introduce myself. I have not met him, full disclosure. 2 things that come to mind when I think about that question. First of all is I would want to make sure that I conveyed a message about the infrastructure we have here in Atlantic Canada, and that I would say that infrastructure is of national significance. So think about our ports, our airports, our energy system, our defense assets. Those are of national significance. I know they recognize this, but let's continue to invest in those to ensure that stays that way. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I would say is just to be, in a very polite way, be sure that is understood connectivity matters. Connectivity matters. So 55 nonstop destinations from Halifax, Stanfield, our port, all of this, connectivity matters. So if you want to, honestly, if you cannot grow And you cannot trade what you cannot move. Right? You cannot grow and you cannot trade what you cannot move. So connectivity matters. Don't forget about that.
Excellent. Earlier on today, there was some discussion about the young people leaving Atlantic Canada, seeking opportunities elsewhere in Canada, elsewhere in the world. I want to ask each of you what case you would make to convince a young person thinking of leaving Atlantic Canada to seek opportunity to stay in this region with all of the challenges that we've discussed today. And I might also add, if you want to address this, what made you stay? What made you come here? What has made you stay? You've all built leadership positions in this region. So those 2 points. And again, just we'll once again go down the line. So Paul, you're going to go
Sure.
first.
I think the first thing I would do is reframe the question. I wouldn't try to get them to stay because of the challenges. I would help them understand the significant opportunities that are here for them if they do stay. I'm from Newfoundland. I managed to move as far as Nova Scotia to go to university and never left.
Yes.
And I think the easiest thing to do is to convince young people why this is a wonderful place to live. Any of us that have the great opportunity to live here understand that. What we need to do is convince them it's a wonderful place to build a career. And for those of us here on the stage, for so many in the room, we also have been able to show it is a wonderful place to build a career at companies that we can believe in, that can take on the world. And if you have the opportunity to build a great life and a great career in somewhere like Nova Scotia or Atlantic Canada, why wouldn't you think about doing that? And it's one of the significant advantages we have as a region. Think of the wonderful undergraduate and graduate universities we have here across Atlantic Canada. Just keeping more of those that come here to go to school and convincing them that they should stay because the opportunity is here is a significant opportunity for us.
Excellent. Karen?
Emera is an international energy company headquartered here in Nova Scotia, here in Halifax, just across the way, and we could not be more proud to be headquartered here. So the first thing I would say to somebody thinking about leaving is talk to us before you go, because we love having great people join our team, and I am a product of that. I was born in Nova Scotia and spent most of my career here. I did spend a period of my career in Toronto, and that was fantastic. I valued that. But to be able to be here and be with a business that for 25 years, I have been able to do incredibly interesting work at a time when the purpose of getting this stuff right, of making sure that we're delivering for customers, that we're considering how can we manage affordability but deliver resiliency and reliability and clean energy and plan for the future. These are issues that I look out at my colleagues here with me that I'm incredibly privileged to be part of those conversations, and they're happening right here in Atlantic Canada, and there's lots more of it to come.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Yeah, I wasn't born here. I came here. I was posted here by the military. So I didn't really have a choice whether I was going to come or not. I remember a couple years later when I got posted away, I was sad. Look out the window. I mean, I was sad to be leaving. The other panelists have commented on the great university sector, the energy, the youthful that's here, all that pent-up energy. With this investment that's coming, to the mayor's point, and our ability to do it consciously and structured in a way that you don't damage the communities that all of them live in. I have 2 daughters, one's a filmmaker and the other's graduating from medical school, and they both want to come here. So for those who are leaving, the grass might always look greener on the other side. For those who haven't been here yet, they want to come here. So I think it's going to be okay.
Excellent. Joyce?
Like Paul, I didn't go very far, so I didn't start in Newfoundland, but I started in Cape Breton, and I got as far as Halifax. And honestly, I speak a lot with young women and girls, and in particular in aviation. And I think you said it, Karen, use yourself as the example. I use myself as the example. So I came at a time where I loved the lifestyle, who doesn't, to your point. not quite sure about the opportunity, but I gave it a good shot. And, look at where we are today. And so I have 3 adult children. I, spent the time talking to them about why they should stay in Nova Scotia. 2 of the 3 are still here, so that's good. Have decided to have their careers here. And what I would say to them today, if they were trying to make that decision today, and what I say to my son, trying to bring him back, is the opportunity couldn't be better than it is right now, right? To build your career here in Atlantic Canada. So you got the lifestyle, you got a better opportunity than you've ever had. Why not?
I am mindful of the time, so I will conclude with one question, which is there are leaders of the community here, there are leaders of the community dialed into this event. Is there any homework, so to speak, that you would give to them, things that you would encourage them to do as they leave this event today or tune out of this event to go out into the community to make this region a stronger, better place? Anyone, we won't go in order. Who wants?
Just randomness. I'll go randomly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not dissimilar from what I commented earlier. We are presented with a unique moment, and we can squander it, or we can use it to build Canadian sovereign capacity. And the Prime Minister and the government are putting in place the mechanisms for us to do it if we choose to lean in and do it. If we choose to sort of wait for someone to ask us or wait for someone to tell us what to do, then probably the future outcome isn't what it could have been. So to everyone in your audience remotely and everyone here, you are responsible for the outcome of this moment.
I'll build on that because part of the surveying through the economic panel was on the level of optimism in Atlantic Canada, in the business community, and it's the highest now that it's ever been. So we are more optimistic than ever with respect to our economic future. Let's not lose that opportunity.
Karen and Paul?
I think that let's keep the collective storytelling going. Let's make sure that we're celebrating each other's success. There's lots of room for all of us to be successful. And Paul, you talked about, this quiet pride that we have, that maybe the voice needs to just be a little bit louder when we talk about the kinds of things that are happening here in Atlantic Canada and the kinds of potential that we're looking at right now. And when you think about all of that, I just think that there just couldn't be a more exciting time for us.
Thank you. Paul, you have the last word.
Yeah, I think the momentum that the other panelists talked about is real, and seizing on that momentum when you have the opportunity is so critical. We should be shouting from the rooftops the success that we're having here right now, the opportunities that are being presented by the significant investment that's going to be made here over the next decade. And when we do that, I believe people will increasingly listen. And if we can get them here and they get to see what we all get to live every day, I think there's a great opportunity for us to convince them to move here, stay here, partner with us here, or invest here.
Thank you very much. It has been an education to be your moderator for this proceeding. I've learned a lot. And ladies and gentlemen, our panelists, a round of applause for our team here.
Thank you to Chris, Joyce, Paul, Karen, and Ian on the stage. I have to agree with Paul and Chris that living here is this is the best place to live of anywhere in Canada. And I grew up here as well. I grew up on the south shore of Nova Scotia and attended University of King's College. And I'm very happy that the Globe and Mail has allowed me to work and live in a place that's always been my home. So we're going to take a brief break now. And I know we just took one, but this one involves snacks, and it's going to be a bit longer. So we're going to have a brief break, and then we're going to hear from Vicki Elliott, the Associate Deputy Minister with the Nova Scotia Department of Growth and Development, and the Honourable Wanda Thomas Bernard, Senator for Nova Scotia, East Preston. Thanks very much. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Hi again. For those of you just joining, I'm Lindsay Jones. I'm the Globe and Mail's Atlantic reporter, and I'm pleased to be your master of ceremonies today. For our next session, we're going to focus on housing and infrastructure priorities. If the ideas we've explored so far help unlock new growth, the question becomes, how do we ensure we're building communities that can keep pace? For this discussion, I would like to call up to the stage Vicki Elliott, Associate Deputy Minister with the Nova Scotia Department of Growth and Development. Welcome, Vicki. And again, we have Patrick Crowther, Editorials Editor at the Globe and Mail. Thank you both.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Lindsay, and welcome back, everyone. And thank you for joining us, Vicki. Really looking forward to our conversation. So I have a little story, but when I was moving to New Brunswick, I remember I was on a flight to St. John. I was chatting with a very lovely woman beside me. She said, well, why are you flying? I said, oh, well, I'm moving to New Brunswick for a new job. And she heard New Brunswick and moving and job, but everything was in the wrong order, I think. And I'm wondering, similarly, so it was a mindset change, I think, for her in that conversation. And similarly, I'm wondering how there's been decades of out-migration and, you know, the kids moved, the grandkids grew up somewhere else, but now that narrative's changed. Repatriation, immigration from outside of Canada, inside of Canada. So how much of a change in mindset is that from your perspective?
So I'll start by saying I think that in Atlantic Canada and certainly in Nova Scotia, we've always felt like we had a growth mindset. And, you know, we were all off doing our things, so the municipalities were giving out building permits. The provincial government was supporting affordable housing, and we have our public housing stock, and the federal government through CMHC was providing loans, and we were all off doing our thing, and we said we were open for business, and businesses could come and grow here. For anybody who was in a Calgary airport back in, you know, mid 2015 to 2017, you probably would have seen a poster on the back of the bathroom door saying, come to Nova Scotia, come home to Nova Scotia. And we thought that we were all doing our part. I think when you talk about a population boom, I mean, fast forward to 2020,
sure.
And it was a real smack in the face that we didn't have a growth mindset. We were managing decline. And so the questions, I mean, 2014, the Ivany Report, for anybody who lives in Nova Scotia and grew up here, you know what the Ivany Report was. We were walking toward a cliff, and we needed to manage for that. How were we going to keep schools open when our kids were all leaving? How were we going to support businesses when they couldn't find talent because everybody was leaving for out west? But when COVID hit, all of a sudden it switched on a dime. And we had to think differently because we had people moving. We had so much interprovincial migration. People with the work from home policy, everybody came to Nova Scotia. Sure. Who wouldn't want to? Look out the window. So we saw a lot of interprovincial migration. We saw an increase in immigration, and suddenly we started to feel the pressure, and we could no longer manage on decline. And the shift in how we needed to look at our systems was significant. And I think the biggest realization was that realization that we didn't have a growth mindset, and we were all operating in silos. And we needed to come together as a system to deal with the pressures that we were seeing. And I'll give a great example of that. Sure. Housing used to be part of the department, which is now known as Opportunities and Social Development. And so it used to be called Department of Community Services for folks who know that. And it was one branch in this big department, and it was a social branch. We are now housed with economic development in a new department called Growth and Development, because housing is economic infrastructure. Housing issues are economic issues. And if we're going to do this complete turnaround and talk about growth, housing and infrastructure are critical to that.
And I wonder, what kind of stresses have you seen from the boom in population? I mean, beyond this sort of, oh gosh, now this really is growth. But like, what kind of, both sort of economically, but maybe broader as well. What kind of growing pains are there?
All sorts.
Okay.
A lot of pressure. So within our ecosystem in Nova Scotia, we have our social infrastructure, and I think that's probably where we felt the first pain, because suddenly vacancy rates plummeted. We had a near zero vacancy rate overnight. We had people looking for housing that couldn't afford rent. Affordability became a key issue. Mm-hmm. And so we needed to respond. We needed to work with other levels of government. We needed to take a hard look at our policy frameworks, and we needed to start to make change to build more housing faster. And as we started to do that, then we realized, gosh, now we're feeling stress on other areas, mm-hmm. like water, wastewater, like transportation. Sure. And so it became much bigger than just social programs. And we realized that we can't just be focused on 2 to 3% of what housing is. We actually need to take the full spectrum into consideration. And housing isn't about, it is. It's about providing affordable housing to households, but the best way to achieve affordability is through housing supply. And so then we had to lean in. We had to reshape ourselves. We had to pivot and realize that we need to focus on a much bigger issue related to housing.
And I was speaking with the mayor earlier today, and he told me something that I found just amazing, which is, depending on the day, Halifax is the most traffic congested city in the country. That has got to be just a shock for people that have grown up here, I would think.
I experience it every day. Yes. I have a personal stake in all of this. Yes. I have children I want to keep at home. I have a transit every morning. Yes, and I would say that, again, housing's one part of the infrastructure puzzle, and we need to address transit. We need to address water, wastewater, all of those pieces coming together, and I would say that we've made significant progress over the last 12 months.
On housing policy, then, I'm wondering, how is, sort of a multi-part question, let's start with, how has housing policy needed to shift over the last, say, 3-4 years? As you, I think you explained part of it. You explained part of it, which was, okay, now we really have had this shift in perception. But what were the sort of policies that then followed on from that?
Sure. So in 2021, when I first joined housing, I remember I was actually just leaving the Department of Health and Wellness, and I had spent a time there during COVID. And so when I was moved over to housing, I thought, gosh, this will feel really quiet after working in health during COVID. And then I arrived, and somebody said, there's a housing crisis, right? And what I would say is that policy has shifted to become inclusive of all of those pieces that I've mentioned. And so
a bit more of a holistic approach. Yeah.
Very much so. And so we can't, it's very much taking a systems approach. So a great example of that is the creation of the Executive Panel on Housing and the HRM. The HRM, Halifax Regional Municipality, holds almost 50% of our population. And this is where we're seeing the majority of our growth happen. So we have to be ready for that growth. And so when we think about policies that we want to create to support that, we can't do it alone. The municipality is actually the linchpin to housing. They hold the bylaws. They hold the development agreements with developers. You ask a developer how long it takes from concept of a development to somebody holding the keys in their hand to their new home. And it can take years because there are studies that need to be done. There are development agreements that are hundreds of pages long that need to be drafted. Transportation, environments considered, rounds of process reviews until they finally get to the end. And time is money.
call me old-fashioned, but I don't think 4 years doesn't sound like a great sense of urgency embedded in there. What do you think? Am I wrong?
I'll say this. So oftentimes it's not a people issue, it's a process issue.
Sure.
And we've come a long way. And so I will say we wouldn't have spoken to HRM before 4 or 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. We would have gone along and done our thing, they would have done their thing. We now have a mandated, legislated executive panel on housing, and we are all working together to dive deeper into some of these process issues. And so people may have heard of the designation of special planning area as a great example of that. And so the Minister of Housing now has the authority to bypass council and provide assurances to developers that their concept will become reality by designation of a special planning area. It still goes through those same processes. That's what we're trying to tackle now. So yes, absolutely, we have room to grow.
Certainly that at the end of the 4 years, things will be still, there's a carrying costs and the economy can shift, and there's a lot of uncertainties along the way, I would think.
Yeah, the kicker, I think, on the development side is we certainly hear from industry, there is not an unwillingness to build, but you need to have the system and the supports and the environment to make it happen. So we have developers knocking down our door to say, we're ready. Mm-hmm. We've got the workforce, we've got the concept, just let us go. Mm-hmm. And 3 years later, we're still having that conversation because of those processes that have been in place for decades that need to be re-examined. We really need to question, can we continue to do what we've always done? Growth doesn't just happen. The mayor said that, Mayor Fillmore said that. Growth doesn't just happen. You have to manage to enable it to happen, and you have to have the right systems in place to do that. And that's what we're trying to do at the provincial level. We see the federal government making change. They're creating national project investments. They're cutting red tape. We're cutting red tape. But we all have to do it together. No one level of government can do this alone.
I would observe that the situation you've just described, we could talk about federal environmental regulations. We could talk about interprovincial trade barriers, and it's the same story. The tension between people that want to do the same thing that's always been done, and the people that see the challenge ahead and understand that no, the old way of doing things has to change to meet that new challenge. So I think that's a broadly applicable language on cooperation between the three levels of government. I think you've made the point that there are some bypasses that the provincial government's done, including a freeze on development fees in the HRM. I guess that wouldn't be so much collaboration as setting some boundaries. But on collaboration, what more can the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal government do together?
We need to come in with an open mind. We need, predominantly, above all else, we need to listen to industry. Industry's ready. Industry's ready to take advantage of opportunity. But if we're not connecting the dots, if we're not listening to them and connecting the dots, then it's really difficult to collaborate. So leaning in with an open mind and being ready to tackle some of these difficult process decisions is critical. I think one of the hardest challenges at a municipal level is that it's when you're managing for status quo, you can take the time to consult. You can take the time for these reviews. We also have a culture in Nova Scotia. People want economic development, but people don't want growth in their backyard.
Jean Chrétien had a saying, everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die.
Bang on.
Yeah. Sorry, he still has that saying, yes. Wondering how much of a choke point is housing as far as Atlantic Canada's ambitions for becoming that sort of big, defense powerhouse? Do you see that as a hurdle the region needs to get over?
Yeah, and so it reminds me of a call I received in 2022. So when we say housing's become an economic issue, prior to that, we wanted safe, affordable housing for all Nova Scotians. But when a business calls you and says, I want to expand here in Nova Scotia, but I don't think I have the housing to do it, can you help me? That's when you realize how important it is to economic growth. And it becomes a competitive advantage. And so if we can get it right in Atlantic Canada, and we can come together, and we can cut red tape and the regulations that no longer make sense, cut the interprovincial trade barriers. Sure. Like in our premier announced last summer that our modular housing was no longer bound to the Nova Scotia isms of the building code. We were just going to align with the national building code. That breaks down an interprovincial trade barrier. We're no longer going to make building officials who come from Ontario go through a rigorous training program. If you're a building official in Ontario, you're a building official in Nova Scotia. So that's really critical. As Atlantic Canadians, we need to let go of our individual ownership and come together as a region to be able to do things differently and create those opportunities.
That's interesting, and hopefully the other provinces will match Nova Scotia's action on the housing regulatory front. I'm wondering, just to change the topic slightly, what about new construction technologies? Do you see that playing much of a role in sort of addressing the situation?
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I would have said robots would solve everything. That's all we needed to do was put robots in all of our manufacturing facilities, and it would solve the housing crisis. What you look at productivity, so the biggest role it can play is increased productivity and pumping out housing faster. When you start to do a deep dive in that, it's so much more than saying go away and do modern methods of construction. Productivity, back in the early 2000s, it would have taken between 40 and 50 people to build 100 homes, 40 to 50 workers. Now we're up to 75 for 100 homes. The number of hours have doubled. But we don't see that in the output. We don't see that in increased productivity. So we do need to innovate.
Sure.
But you can't just tell people to go and innovate. And the Atlantic provinces actually came together with a COA and did a bit of a deep dive in that space. And what came back was that it's not technical issues. It's not about throwing robots in facilities. It's the systemic issues. It's the fact that CMHC funding mechanisms don't work for modular and off-site construction because they provide draws when they go and do inspections on site. Well, it's not delivered till it's ready. That's an issue. It's needing to create the environment for good things to happen. I asked somebody who's knowledgeable about the European sector.
Sure.
This sector has taken off in Europe. It has been there for decades. 90% in some parts of Europe, 90% of homes are made in a facility. In Nova Scotia, it's much less than 5%. And so we have a long way to go. But the industry, when you look at the industry and how it operates there, our industry is just as savvy. So I asked someone who's familiar with the industry, like, how is it that they're so innovative in what they do? And they said, because they're outcomes focused. And we get mired down in process. So they are goal oriented. They will say, you need to build to this goal. And industry will go and they will innovate and they will figure out how to get there. And so then I asked, okay, and what kind of incentives do you provide for modular housing? And they said, industry doesn't need incentives for modular housing because it happens on the demand side. You need to change the culture. People here still think modular equates to mobile. People don't understand So people need the incentives. How do we, again, change the culture on the demand side? And government's never going to be the be-all and end-all in providing that demand. We do RFPs. We can build in that we want to see modern methods of construction, but market needs to support market, and individual households need to support that market. So we need a real culture shift to enable modern methods of construction, and but we need to create the environment for that to happen.
Sounds great to me. That 4 years you talked about, what should we want to get that down to? 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 1 month? What do you think?
Oh gosh. When you think about a house that can be made in a facility within a couple of weeks, wouldn't it be great to have on the other end? We're aiming for just 6 to 12 months at this point.
Sure.
To work with our municipal partners on bringing down those process reviews, on not compromising safety or standards by any means, but just on how do we start to crack old models that are outdated to get more housing faster, because that will be our competitive advantage.
And surely doing reviews concurrently rather than consecutively has got to be part of the answer.
Absolutely. Like I said, process, not people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's in a way very unsexy, but in a way, it is. To get that right, wouldn't that be exciting?
Yeah.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our time, and is there a sort of a wrap-up thought, a big thought you want to share with the audience?
I will say that I mentioned this to my deputy yesterday. I said, things feel different now. I do feel, and I heard people earlier talk about, we're in a moment.
Sure.
And I know it sounds cheesy when I'm the third person to say it in a day, but we
treat that as triple confirmation in journalism. Yeah.
Things feel different. We know that there's unrest in the U.S., and in some ways that's been a bit of a kick in the pants to get Canada together, to get provinces and territories working together. Let's embrace it as an opportunity. Let's break down the silos, and let's act as a system to enable the opportunities in front of us. We have a choice. And I think we want to take the choice of working together to achieve the success we know can happen.
And this time, we've talked about growth, as you said, for decades, but this time it does feel different, doesn't it?
Feels different.
Well, thank you very much for those very interesting remarks. And thank you to everyone as well for listening. Unfortunately, we have to leave things there, so please join me in thanking Vicki for taking the time to be here today. And now I'll turn things back over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Patrick Brethauer and Vicki Elliott, for being on the stage and for that very interesting conversation. I must say I've noticed over the last few years, people talk more about the cost of housing than the weather, which is usually the go-to, so it is a very popular discussion. To close out the afternoon, we're going to turn our focus to the benefits from the growth we've been discussing across Atlantic Canada. As opportunities expand, it's critical that the voices of communities and people impacted by major decisions are reflected in boardroom conversations, helping to build a more inclusive and unified Canada, especially in today's increasingly divided landscape. For this important discussion, it's my pleasure to welcome the Honourable Wanda Thomas-Bernard, Senator for Nova Scotia East Preston, and with her, Rachel Mendelson, Deputy National Editor at the Globe and Mail. Rachel has deep roots in Atlantic Canada. Her mom was born in St. John's, Newfoundland, and grew up in Halifax. Her dad was from Sydney. As a child, Rachel attended summer camp in Lunenburg County. She graduated from the School of Journalism at the University of King's College and started her career at the Halifax Daily News, alongside myself, where she interviewed Andy Fillmore for a series of stories on HRM by design. It was an ambitious project that he was leading to reimagine the downtown. Please welcome Senator Bernard and Rachel to the stage.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you to Senator Bernard for being here. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic is so important to you, building an inclusive community as well as one that's growing.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Globe and Mail for inviting me to close out this incredible series of conversations today. When I think about my own journey, and to tell you a bit about myself, Rachel, so thank you for that question. I'm, I think, an 8th generation African Nova Scotian. I live in the community of East Preston, which was one of the Black lawless communities. If you look at my full bio, I've been the first in many, many things. The first African Nova Scotian woman to be appointed to the Senate, the first African Nova Scotian to be hired in a tenure-track position at Dalhousie University, the first person of African descent to receive tenure and promotion, and now retirement to Professor Emeritus at Dalhousie University. When I think about those firsts, it's not something I celebrate. And let me tell you why I don't celebrate it. If my ancestors have been here since the 1700s, the fact that I'm the first in anything is a stark reminder of opportunities they didn't have, opportunities that were kept from them. And for me, that's really important. I recognize that I am where I am because of my ancestors. I acknowledge every single day that I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. And to do the work that I do, I wouldn't be able to do that work without the strength that they pour into me every day, and the community continues to pour into me. When I think about that question about, why stay? Why did I stay? I stayed in Atlantic Canada. I stayed in Halifax because I felt a responsibility, a deep responsibility. I'm where I am because I had opportunities. I had opportunities that my ancestors didn't have, that my peer group didn't have. My sister and I and my cousin, we were the first people from our community to attend university and graduate. That was back in the 60s. That's incredible, if we've been here since the 1700s. So I know that representation matters. And as I was building my career, one of the things that I significantly focused on was lifting as I climbed, lifting as I led. And I felt that it was important to be here, to be able to do that lifting, so that people, young people, could see me, not just read about me, but to see me, to meet me, to talk with me, and to be inspired, to have their own dreams fulfilled. I certainly wanted that for my own daughter, but she left Nova Scotia because she couldn't find a job here. My son-in-law left Nova Scotia because he couldn't find a job here after applying for 120 positions. Just hearing that is exhausting, to think about someone applying for 120 jobs and then deciding, I need to work. So when I think about the future of Atlantic Canada, this notion of leaving no one behind is I feel very passionate about that, and I believe there's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure we truly don't leave anyone behind.
So to follow up on that, many of the people on the stage have answered, what they would say to young people to convince them to stay. And I wonder what you would say to the people in this room to create opportunities for young people, perhaps young people from marginalized communities, people of color who may be thinking about leaving. What can we do? What can the people in this room do to encourage them to stay?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's not just about convincing young people to stay and invest in Atlantic Canada. It's really about industry and government and businesses creating opportunities so that young people want to stay. And young people will stay if they have jobs. People want jobs, people want to work. And so for those of you in the room, instead of looking at you, Rachel, I should look at the folks out here. I want to make sure you're listening. If you're in a position to hire, if you're in a position to innovate, if you're in a position to create change, to lead change, I really encourage you to build equity issues into that work as a forethought and not an afterthought. So think about when you go back to your offices, I really want you to look around. Look around your boardroom tables. Look at your list of your staff. Look at your policies. And if you see gaps, you are in a position to take responsibility to do something about it. Lead the change that you want to see. Lead the change that our young people need if they're going to stay here in Atlantic Canada. That's the only way we're going to make that kind of change really happen.
Inspiring call to action. So the Intersect series has been examining what has been described as the fraying of the Canadian promise. In the newsroom at the Globe and Mail, we refer to it as the promise of Canada, and it's sort of a guiding light that will lead us to pursue certain topics, investigate pour resources into investigating certain issues. And for us at the Globe, it means perhaps exposing a lack of access to dental care for fly-in communities in the Northwest Territories. It might mean, looking at affordability, declining affordability of housing. And I wanted to ask you, what does the Canadian promise mean to you?
When I think about the Canadian promise, I think about Canada being a place where you want to belong, a place where everyone belongs, a place where everyone feels welcome, a place where everyone is included, a place where everyone can be their authentic selves, can really be who they are, and be appreciated for who they are and for what they bring to their communities, what they bring to their workplaces. But that's not the reality for many Canadians. And I want to be in a Canada where that can change. I believe, I have a lot of hope, critical hope, that things can change in this country. And I think when we think about economic development, we need to think about economic development with a human rights lens, so that we bring that lens to the development that is that Canadian promise. I was in a grocery store recently. I was in a line, and to be honest, I was a little impatient. My commute is to and from Ottawa, so I'm only home for a few days on the weekend, and I was out doing some shopping, and I was standing in line, and there was a gentleman ahead of me. He was a new Canadian. I could tell by some of the things in his cart that he was shopping for his family. And he was taking a long time, and I was feeling a little impatient. But then I calmed myself down and said, Wanda, be patient. And when I looked at what was really going on, he was taking things out of his cart because he didn't have enough money to pay for them. This happened just in May. And as he was taking things out, the cashier was reducing those things from his bill. And then at one point she said, you're still $5 short. And he had this tub of ice cream. He took the he was about to take the ice cream out. He had his hands on it. And I went into my wallet, and I took $5, and I said, take the ice cream. And I gave the cashier the money. He looked at me in absolute shock, because he couldn't believe that a stranger would be so kind. And it wasn't pity that I felt in that moment. It was empathy. I grew up in poverty. I know what it's like to have to put things back. And in that moment, I could feel what it would have been like for him to go home without that ice cream. No one should have that experience in this country. No one should have that experience in this region. It shouldn't happen, but it does. That's the reality of so many people. You know, I've been a social worker, Rachel, for 49 years. Now, I know, folks, I look 49, right? But I've been a social worker. I started young. In the 49 years that I've been practicing social work, I've worked with a lot of people who live in poverty. I've worked with people who are dealing with addictions. I've worked with people with mental health issues. I've worked with people in prisons. I've never met anyone who chose to live in poverty. I've never worked with anyone who woke up one day and said, you know what, when I grow up, I'm going to be a poor person. It's the circumstances. It's the lack of opportunity. The social determinants of health, which are really structural determinants of health. And you know, we were only recently able to have Health Canada include racism as a social determinant of health. Yet my ancestors, yet Indigenous people will tell you that we've known for generations that racism is a structural determinant of health. So knowing that, recognizing that, and then taking the action to address it, taking the action to redress, that's so important. So we need people who are in positions of power to not feel guilty about power. You know, if you don't have power, you don't have to feel guilty about it. Think about how you can share the power that you have. How do you use the power that you have? When you share the power, it's different than abusing the power. We've seen for far too long power being abused in our country. It's time for that to change. When I think about the pivotal moment that we have, the pivotal conversations that we've had today, and I listened intently to the conversations, and one of the things that I felt was missing was that equity lens. I didn't hear that equity lens being brought to the conversation. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to bring that now.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I was going to ask you about the gaps as you were sitting here listening today, and I wonder if you can just expand on that and, you know, tell me about where you felt those gaps in a most pronounced way, and what do we do to address them?
I want to share with you some of the themes I was writing down as I listened to the speakers, and I want to thank you all. It's not, I'm realizing as I'm sitting here, it's not easy to sit here under these lights and to have conversations, these important conversations. But thinking about, you know, building our next chapter, I heard people talk about partnership, people talked about inclusion, people talked about belonging, people talked about the opportunities we have here in defense, in shipbuilding, in energy, green energy. Some people talked about our size, our small size in Atlantic Canada actually being an advantage and how we can use that. How challenges can become opportunities. The need to focus on our strength, the need to be intentional, the need to be in collaboration. Thinking about economic investment and the importance of also including human investment. So as we're doing that, here's what I want to add. This is indeed a unique moment in our collective history. And so when you're looking at, I want to zero in on workforce availability and focus specifically on defense and shipbuilding. And here's the ray of hope that I see. So I think about Irving Shipbuilding, for example. One of the things, is anyone here from Irving? No, okay, I can talk about them. I want to hold them up as a positive example. One of the things that they've done specific cohorts to ensure workforce diversity. So they've had cohorts for women in trades, for persons with, for indigenous people in trades, and for people of African descent in trades. That's exceptional. That's the kind of business integrity and action and accountability that we really need. So that's a model that we can really use. So when people are talking about Irving, shipbuilding as an example of big industry here in Atlantic Canada, look at their model around workforce, employment equity issues in their workforce, and how they've worked to ensure that the workforce is trained. So they've worked with community partners to make that happen, and it's excellent. It truly is excellent. So it's a really good example. So if you know someone who's in a leadership position at Irving, reach out to them tonight to say, you know, I heard the senator talking about you today, and she's proud of the work you're doing, just so, you know, they can keep going. People need to hear positive things. And then I think about many of the speakers today talked about defense. And I want to say that when I think about our Canadian Armed Forces and the positioning of Canadian Armed Forces, I think we're well positioned. When I think about reparations, and I don't know how many people in this room even know about this, the Canadian Armed Forces gave a public apology to the descendants of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. But that apology wasn't just an apology, it was a commitment to reparations. And part of those reparations is really looking at what do we need to do differently in the forces so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Do people here know about the No. 2 Construction Battalion? Are there some people here that don't know about the No. 2 Construction Battalion? Okay, so let me tell you there's a few people that don't know, so I'll tell you about it very briefly. And then you're going to go and do some work and learn more about them. The Canadian Armed Forces website has a whole site devoted to the No. 2 Construction Battalion. During World War I, Black men from across Canada wanted to enlist. They were not allowed. They were told this is a white man's war. Black Canadian men who were experiencing such profound racism in their local communities, but they were committed. They saw themselves as Canadians, even though they weren't treated as whole Canadians, as full Canadians. And they wanted to enlist. And they were told no. But then eventually, they needed them, so they were allowed to enlist, but in construction. They didn't have guns. They had shovels. So they were, used. That's why they were called the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The apology that happened in Truro, where they met and went off to the war, that apology, I think, was a defining moment for the Canadian Armed Forces. And again, I think there are efforts that they are engaged in, that they're working in. It wasn't a one and done. It wasn't just about the apology. It was also about the accountability. What comes next? What changes do we need to make in the organization? What changes do we need to make in the culture of the organization? What are the things that we need to do to make the Canadian Armed Forces a place where everyone who chooses to enlist has equitable opportunities and also feels that sense of belonging? I think they're doing a good job in terms of correcting the mistakes of the past and trying to do better in the future.
I think we all learned something today. Thank you. So throughout your career, you've emphasized the need to think of inclusion not as an add-on, but as something that's baked in. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to explain what you mean by that, and specifically how that philosophy can be applied when we're thinking about, fixing the housing issues, improving economic growth and development, and the other challenges that's facing not just Atlantic Canada, but the entire country. How do we ensure that inclusion is something that's baked in?
I think when I think about having inclusion baked in, it's beginning with that lens of inclusion. And so organizing everything from that perspective, and also bringing that human rights lens, that equity lens to the work, really looking at what do we need to do to ensure that we're not leaving anyone behind? What do we need to do to ensure that everyone's included, that everyone feels a part of this process? It means creating policy. When you're creating policies, the people most directly impacted by policies also need to be part of the conversation as those policies are being developed. And that's not the way we do things. So we're talking really about a paradigm shift, really shifting the way we're doing things so that we're being more inclusive, intentionally. Prime Minister Carney, in a recent international speech people have heard about, one of the lines in that speech, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I'll tell you, we are tired of being on the menu. We are so tired of being on the menu. We want to be at the table, and if you feel that your tables are not big enough, create a bigger table. Right? Create a bigger table. Voices need to be heard. Voices have the right to be heard. And people who've been doing this work, the advocates, the civil rights advocates, the feminist advocates, the disability rights advocates, people are tired. Because it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over and over. You're creating awareness, but where is the action? And where is the accountability? So when I think about the future, when I think about the building back better, building the better, stronger Canada, I think it's really important that Canada include all of us with a seat at the table and not on the menu.
You've issued many calls to action in our time here together, and before we leave, I just wanted to give you, another opportunity to speak directly to those in the room, the policymakers, the business leaders, and issue what your call to action is, what you'd like everyone to reflect on in order to create a more inclusive community going forward.
Thank you for that last question. I really want to invite people to not feel overwhelmed, because when you think about all of the changes that are needed, it's big. But if all of us, if each of us is doing the work that we can in our sphere of influence, then it's not so much work, because we're all moving towards the same vision, the same goal. So I would really encourage people, this has been a full day. It's been a day of critical conversation and reflection about where we go in Atlantic Canada. And so when you return to your workplaces, when you return home this evening, have the conversations and look at your own circle. Start with your circle, and then you'll have that ripple effect. But if you start with your own circle and look at what's here and what's working, what am I proud of, but what's missing? Who's missing? Who's not at the table? Who's not in this workplace? And what do I need to do to make that better? What partnerships do I need to cultivate to make that better? We heard a lot today about partnerships, the value of partnerships and collaboration. Communities who are marginalized, who are on the outside looking in, they have a lot to offer. They spend a lot of time analyzing what's going on. Bring us in, because we can help you with those actions.
Thank you so much. It's been really inspiring sitting up here with you. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bernard and Rachel. That was an incredible conversation. And I just appreciate Senator Bernard's uplifting statements. I think it's a great way to close out the day. Before we do that, I'd like to call our Editor-in-Chief, David Walmsley, to the stage. He's going to make our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thank you all for your attention and your interest. The Globe is older than Canada herself. It was created in 1844 by George Brown, and he began a journey in which he was trying to tell a story that ultimately became the national story, and it's a national story that's continuing to evolve each and every year. And I think on reflection, when it comes to the ideas of where Canada is going to go, we heard today the idea that although we are a series of regions and we have the modern day challenge of being a horizontal country with 6 time zones, there is an enormous opportunity, and it's down to the people that we have in this country. We talk inside the Globe and Mail about meeting the moment. I don't think there is a more dramatic moment that this country has faced, probably since it was created. And we cannot be shy about recognizing the threats to the country in both security and trade terms. It is existential, and it requires leadership from the Globe and Mail to make that point. And people say to me, when you have the challenge of being an editor of a national paper, how do you possibly create priorities? There's so many conflicting elements that come at you. I have staff who are in war zones in the front lines in Ukraine. I have reporters who are waiting for the FIFA World Cup to begin, a totally different extreme. We, of course, have our crown jewel of Report on Business, heavily involved in personal finance, investing, policy, and as you heard from a number of speakers today, the political story, both regionally, provincially, and, of course, the national political arena in Ottawa. As well as being the editor of the Globe, I'm also the president of the World Editors Forum. I represent 15,000 editors globally. It's a 2-year job. And in the role that I have, I realize the luck that I have to be in Canada. You know, you can sometimes get frustrated by the traffic. You can get frustrated by a lot of restrictions in your housing policies. You can say not enough is being done. But when you land home, you also feel pretty lucky. And I have the eyes of an immigrant myself. I came from Ireland, June the 28th, 1998. Anyone who's emigrated into a different country never forgets the date. And it's vitally important that the journalists in this country give back. It is not a place to be selfish. And in all that we're trying to do at the Globe, it is to ensure that we're convening a national conversation. There are more than 30,000 Canadians come to Globe and Mail events annually, either in person or remotely. And Intersect is an essential ingredient of that. It's been too long since we were here in a formal capacity, beyond Lindsay and Dakshana, who make their home in Nova Scotia. There needs to be a greater outreach by us, and that's rural as well as urban. And so we are committing to extending Intersect far beyond in the year to come. The thing that teaches me and the priorities that I'm dealing with is history. I always go back to the Canadian patent of 3738, the invention of the light bulb. And when you go to the trivia night, you'll think it's Thomas Edison, and it wasn't. It was 2 Canadians, Matthew Evans and a guy called Harry Woodward, who in 1874 created the incandescent light bulb, and 5 years later sold it to Thomas Edison, who everyone remembers today. Intellectual property rights were mentioned in a number of the conversations. We have to remember that we give a lot away. We created artificial intelligence. We've given it away. We have today in Canso seen the launch of a rocket. That provides an element of sovereignty. And that question of sovereignty is one that is going to become increasingly important, especially in the defense space, where we look to our 3 coasts. And if the United States shuts off our satellites, we go deaf and blind overnight. The total number of minutes it takes for a missile to hit Washington over the Arctic is under 10. The actual number is classified. If that's the case, where's our northern border? And what are we going to do to defend ourselves? both from those who are coming from the far north and those who are below us in the south. History also taught us that the naval force on the Atlantic in 1938 was virtually non-existent. And by 1945, there was the third or fourth largest, depending how you measure it, third or fourth largest naval force on Earth, carrying out convoy after convoy protection on the North Atlantic. The creation of Diana and the NATO acceleration plan cements that history in 2026. The opportunities of this country are enormous, but we have to ensure that there is opportunity. And in the fall, we're focusing on 3 or 4 main priorities. Tax reform, the Globe and Mail, because it will not come from government. Tax reform will be proposed by us in a series of very deep looking projects to see what the answer to tax in Canada should be. And in addition to that, the question of regulations. We will look at the question of youth unemployment and employment when it comes to artificial intelligence. We will question the purpose of what this country must be in order for it, as well as the Globe and Mail, to meet the moment. The opportunities are enormous, but the challenges are stark. And what I find in closing is a reflection that you all realize that. And I think we all did get that in that phrase, a kick in the seat of the pants last year, when perhaps we were suffering from drift and complacency. And as a news organization, we have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that we're telling you the truth, we're following the facts, we curry no favor with anyone, and sometimes news is uncomfortable. But we are resolute in that determination, and because we are privately owned, and ownership makes the big difference, we can be independent. The only thing I am asked on a quarterly basis by our owners is to make the country better. So it's a privilege for me, and it's a wonderful opportunity to meet so many of you, and I thank you for all your attention. And I'll pass it back to Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you, David. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I'd also like to thank CIBC, our presenting sponsor, along with other event sponsors. On your table, you'll find a card with a QR code that will take you to the event survey. Please take a few minutes and complete it and suggest a few topics for next time. We hope you enjoyed today. Let us know. And now I would like to invite you to stay and have a drink, refreshments, and networking outside. Thank you.